Janie here again with you to say that the next part of the patterns for the Fruit Garden Cal are now live on the Starcraft website. You can head over there and download patterns for free in either UK or US terminology and in the Dutch language. I've done a short video, it's shorter than the last one, showing you how to work through the motif for this set of patterns. You're going to make a motif called Columbine, which is this one here. This is it in the naturals version, the bamboo and cotton, and the little video that I've done for you will talk you through it to that stage there, as from there on it kind of matches the motif that you did in part one, which was called Forget Me Not. So if you want to stick with me and see a few little tips for making this piece, then I hope you'll stay. What you're going to do is you're going to make 4 of these motifs this time, and you're also going to make 8 pieces. This has still got a little tail end of yarn hanging off it. You're going to make 8 of these motifs, these tiny little flowers that actually become part of a bigger motif called Acanthus. And if you've seen pictures of the design, then you'll have possibly seen this complicated motif called Acanthus. It's quite a tough one. I'm absolutely in love with it, but what we've done is we've broken it down into pieces to make it easier for you to work through it. You need to make 8 of these, so we kind of felt if we left these to the end and you had to make 8 of these in the final set of patterns that you'd be ready to kill me. So we thought we'd avoid that and break it down into pieces. So you're just going to make this time 8 of these central little flowers, and as I said, the forthcoming video will show you how to do that. It's been really amazing over the last couple of weeks seeing all your pictures of your Forget Me Not motifs coming up on social media, and I'm really pleased that you're all having good fun making it. I'll just say again to keep your eye on your tension. I've seen comments where people are saying mine's 2 centimeters smaller or bigger than the measurements in the patterns. Is that going to matter? To be honest, 2 centimeters might matter. If you're just half a centimeter out or really little bit out, then that's going to be fine. But just keep your eye on your tension. And I've also seen quite a lot of people talking about blocking and saying that they're blocking their motifs. And if you've read through the patterns, you'll see that at the end of the pattern instructions I do say that I suggest you don't block. The reason for this is that you're asked, after you've got your central panel made, you're asked to add an edging onto it. I don't think you do that until pattern set 5, but you are asked to put an edging on, and my concern is that if you've blocked all your pieces, when you put your edging on, it will start to look wavy. So I would really, I know lots of you really like to block your pieces, but I would really suggest you don't do it yet. If you've done it already, then don't worry, just don't block anymore. Everything will sort of ease into place when you come to make that central panel. That's it for the telling off for some of you. So I'm going to leave you with the forthcoming video. You're going to make this motif called Columbine and these central little flowers for the Acanthus motif. I hope you enjoy it, I hope you have fun, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your results of your crochet again over the next couple of weeks. And in the meantime, do keep well, and I'll see you soon. So I'm going to talk you through how to work the Columbine motif, which I've got the bamboo and cotton version here to show you. It's worked in a very similar way to the piece you made in part 1, the Forget Me Nots, in that you have this central flower, which I've got one here actually that I've already made for the other version, the recipe 1. So you're going to make a flower in the same way that you did in part 1 in the Forget Me Not, and then you're going to add in, the difference is you're going to add in these little leaves here that you can see at the back of the Forget Me Not, and then the rest of the motif is very, very similar to part 1. I tried to make most of the blocks work in the same sort of way so that you got used to doing this outline to make it into a square. So hopefully, having done part 1, you'll find the next blocks are logical in the way that you make the square. So you need to make 4 of these. So I'm going to show you how to make this part, just the central part of this motif first, and then in a bit I'm going to show you how to start on the Acanthus motif, which is the other part of the pattern you need to do in this set, part 2. Okay, so this is the bamboo cotton version, and if you're going to make the bamboo cotton version, which is recipe 2, you need to be using a 3.5mm hook. I'm going to work on recipe 1, which is the Life DK and batik version, so I'm going to be using a 4mm hook, which is this one here. Let's move those out of the way. Okay, so I've already made the central flower according to the pattern, and it's been made in exactly the same way as the forget-me-not in part 1. At the centre here I've made 4 chain and made a ring, and then done 8 GC into the centre of the ring, and I've done that using Fern, the shade Fern. If you're doing the bamboo and cotton version, you will have used Peach at that point. On the second round I've then done 2 double crochets into every stitch, joined into 1, did 2 into every stitch, and that was using the batik heather. If you're doing the bamboo and cotton version, that you would have done in Canyon, which is kind of like a dusky pinky terracotta colour. Okay, and then on my next round, round 2, I've done a double crochet using Mint, 2 chain, and skipped a stitch and done another double crochet, and I've done that round, which is then subsequently covered up by the petals, and then I've done round 3, which makes the petals themselves, and that was done, as I said, in the same way that you'd made the forget-me-not motif. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to make the leaves that are made at the back of the motif. I said before, when you see the turn working at the back, it often makes you want to turn your piece over. You'll see that I've sewn my ends in at this point as well, because I've been a good girl, so I hope you guys are all sewing your ends in as you go along as well. And I've measured it as well, so it's the right measurement. I think it's supposed to be 6, let me just check, yes, 6 centimetres at that point. Okay, so I'm working at the back, but I'm keeping the right side facing me. So I'm doing what we did before. I'm going to tip a petal forward and find a skipped stitch behind there that was made on the row using the heather, which is round 1. So I'm going to put my hook into there, and then I'm using, I've got to remember what colour I'm using. I'm using denim, which is here. I should have got it ready before. Of course I didn't. Let's just get a bit of that out the centre of the ball if I can. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to join denim into that stitch. Let's just get back there again. So I've put my petal forward like that. I find that skipped stitch, which is there, catch my yarn through and do 1 chain, and that gets me joined in. Okay, now I'm going to do 1 double crochet into that same stitch. And then if you watched my video last time, you'll remember that I did this little trick where I pull the tail out so that that doesn't look like 2 stitches. So I'm just going to pull my tail out again so that that is now a nice clear stitch. If you haven't watched part 1 and seen that little tip, you might want to go back and watch that. It's a way of getting a really nice neat join at the beginning. So that's 1 DC into the skip stitch. Then I'm going to do 2 chain, and I'm going to push the next petal forwards and find the skip stitch behind that one and do a double crochet into that skip stitch there. Okay, so here I am at the end of that round. I've got 2 chain left to do to create my last chain space, and I'm just going to do a slip stitch into that first stitch at the beginning of the round. And just like the forget-me-not motif, to this point I can see my little stitches coming through at the front of the work, which I think is so pretty. And I've created a framework at the back of the piece, and I should have 8 chain spaces made here at the back. So do just double check that you have got 8, because that's pretty important for the next round. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, again, I'm sort of pushing those leaves, those petals, sorry, forwards that were made on the flower, and I'm going to do a slip stitch into that next chain space. Then I'm going to do one chain that doesn't count as a stitch and one double crochet into that next same chain space. Now I'm going to create the leaf by making 6 chain, and it's really important that you don't over pull the last chain of the 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now what some people have a tendency to do is, at this point, before they turn to work back down the chain, is they give it a good pull, and that has made the last chain really small and tight in there. And for this motif, it's really important that that chain is not tight like that, because you're going to use it later on, so it's really important that you don't do that over pull there. So I'm just going to take that back and do those 6 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now straight away I don't over pull, and I'm going to go and do a double crochet into that next chain. So I'm skipping 1 and I'm going to do a double crochet into the next one, which is a US single. I'm going to do a half treble into the next one. That's a half double if it's US terms. Then I'm going to do a treble into this one. Whoops. And a treble into the next one, so that's 2 trebles on the bounce, that's US double, and a half treble. Did I miss it? Yes, I did. A half treble into the final chain there, so that's straight through. Okay, so there's my little leaf. I've skipped the top chain, I've done a double, a half treble, 2 trebles on the trot, and finished with a half treble. Then I'm going to do 1 double crochet into that same chain space, and that kind of finishes off my little small leaf like that. Then I'm going to do 1 chain and do a double crochet into the next chain space and start that whole process again. So I'm going to do it once more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm kind of in control there. Just check that you've got nice even chains at that point. 1 double crochet into the first, well, it's not the first, it's the second, you've skipped 1. A half treble into the next one, a treble into the next one, a treble into the next one, so that's 2 trebles, and a half treble into the last one. If you get to the end there and think you've got another stitch, it's just that you've got the double crochet left behind at the beginning there, so don't think that that's another chain. It isn't, it's just your stitch. Then you do 1 double crochet into that same chain space, 1 chain, push the petals forward and do 1 double crochet into the next chain space. So I've done 2 little leaves there. You're going to do 8 of them. I'm going to do 8, but I'm going to do those off camera. So when you get to the end of the round, you should have 8 of these little leaves. Here I am at the end of that round, and I've got 8 petals or leaves. I can't remember whether they're leaves or petals in the pattern. What have I called them? Let's have a quick look. I have called them thin leaves. Okay, so it's really important that when you get to the end here, you remember to do that final chain. You owe the pattern a chain, so you're going to do 1 chain, and then you're going to slip stitch to the top of that first double crochet, which is there, and pull that through, and then we're going to fasten off the yarn. So I'm just going to get my scissors and leave in about 10 centimetres, a good 10 centimetres, just cut the tail end. And then if you remember from part 1, I don't do that extra chain when I fasten off. What I do is I just gently pull the yarn, and then with my hook pull that tail through to the back of the work there. Okay, so when you look at your flower, and I look at mine, I'm going to put it down so it hopefully you can see it a bit clearer. I've got my 2 tail ends there, but I've got 8 of the little thin leaves sitting behind the motif, and when I turn that over, that's what it looks like at the back, like a little, I don't know, like a little star or sun at the back there. Okay, so you can just about see the remaining parts of those other rounds in there, and from the front you just see these nice little leaves sitting behind the flower. Okay, what we're going to use on the next round is we're going to use these chain spaces, these single chain spaces in here, to work the next round. So I'm going to just get my colours ready, and I'll show you that next. Okay, so I'm ready to join my next colour in, and on the Life DK and Batik version I'm using Caramel. If you're doing the bamboo cotton version, you're going to be using the dark bluey grey, which is called Night. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for these chain spaces that are made between the 2 thin leaves on the previous round, and I'm going to join in away from where I finished off. So I finished off here, so I'm going to join in over here, and again I've got my right side facing me. And the first thing we're going to do is make the framework for the next round. So I'm going to put my hook into that chain space, draw the yarn through and do 1 chain, make sure my tail is on my right hand side there, and then just do 1 double crochet into that stitch there. Okay, and you can see straight away, like we did in the first video, that stitch, that little bit of yarn really wants to jump out of there, so I'm just going to pull that out of there, so get a nice neat stitch. And then I'm going to do 3 chain, 1, 2, 3, and I'm doing those 3 chain behind that petal, so that I can then do my 1 double crochet into that next chain space. So when you look at that, if I pull that forward, you've got a 3 chain that sit behind the little leaf there. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, behind the leaf, find that 1 chain space which is there, there we go, and then do another 3 chain, 1, 2, 3, and find that next chain space, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 2, 3, then I'm coming up to my final one, 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to do a slip stitch into that first one there. If I can find it, there we go, slip stitch into that one, and that's completed my framework for the next round. So that's what it will look like at the back there, and I've created 8 chain spaces behind the petals. So just check that you've got the 8 chain spaces. Don't worry at this point if your piece is looking quite curly. Mine is curly here, you can see it's all kind of very 3D. Don't worry about that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now on the next round is I'm going to create just a round of treble crochet, which is US double, but first I'm going to do a slip stitch into the next chain space. So do my slip stitch, and then I'm going to do 3 chain, 1, 2, 3, and that counts as my first treble crochet, first double crochet if you're using US terms. Into the same chain space I'm going to do 4 trebles, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that was 4 true trebles there, and the 3 chain at the beginning of the round. So that is the equivalent of 5 treble crochet. That's US doubles if you're using US terms. So I'm going to push the next leaf forwards and do 5 trebles into the next chain space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to do that the whole way round so that you can see there I've got another 5 trebles into that same chain space, and I'm just pulling those leaves and petals forward so that I can work behind the motif. I haven't turned it, I've got the right side facing me, and I'm going to put 5 trebles into each chain space the whole way round that motif. Here I am at the end of round 6, and I've created this framework behind the thin leaves using the caramel shade. If you've been working in the bamboo cotton, you will have done that using Dusk, which is the light blue. But what you'll see when you look behind here is that in each chain space you've put 5 trebles, so 5 long post stitches behind there, and it's created this kind of circular piece behind the thin leaves and petals that you've previously made. I've actually sewn my ends in at that point. I didn't do the last one. I tend not to do the last one until I've done my next couple of rounds. The reason I don't sew that in is because sometimes I've found I actually sew into the stitches, and then on the next round I can struggle to find the right stitches if I've sewn in the wrong way. So I tend to just leave that last one, but I've sewn the others in as I went along. It also means I can identify really easily where I finished, so I can see I finished here, so I'm going to start the next colour kind of over. If that's 6 o'clock, then I'm going to start over here at 12 o'clock. So I'm using parchment, and I'm going to join my yarn in to that opposite stitch, the first one of that 5 treble made on the previous round. So I'm going to do 1 chain, just put my tail end over that, oops, over there, just to catch it in, and then do 2 more chain. So that counts as my first stitch. Then I'm going to do 2 treble into the next stitch, 1, 2, and then I'm going to find the skipped chain at the top of that next leaf, and I'm going to use the real sort of hook part of the hook to find it. So it's that little bar of yarn there that I'm looking for, and I'm just going to use my hook to find it. There, it's just one single bit of yarn, and do a double into that skipped chain. Then looking behind the leaf again, so just pulling that forward, skip the next stitch, 2 trebles into the next stitch, 1 treble into each of the next 2 stitches, and 2 treble into the next stitch. So I've made 6 stitches since I joined the little leaf in. So then what I'm going to do then is find the skipped chain at the top of the next leaf. So again, just using my hook to find it, and do 1 double crochet into there. That holds the leaf into place. Then I'm going to skip that stitch and do 2 trebles into the next stitch, 1 into the next, 1 into the next, and 2 into the next. Okay, so that's 6 stitches in between catching those leaves down. So if I'm looking for it again here, I can just about see it there between my thumbs. I'm just going to use the hook part of the hook to find that single little bit of chain there, and do 1 double crochet into there. Don't forget to skip the stitch behind. So you're just going to do that the whole way round until you've completed that round. I've just caught my final little thin leaf in, so I'm just going to do that last repeat. Well, it's not a whole repeat, it's just that last bit to finish off. I'm going to skip the stitch behind the leaf, do 2 treble, that's US double into the next stitch, one into the final stitch, and then I'm going to do my slip stitch to the third chain to finish off. So I'm just going to put my hook into that third chain up there and complete my slip stitch so that I've caught all my thin leaves down into place. From behind you can't really see the little blue thin leaves now, they're sitting in front of this work that you've just completed. I can probably sew that end in now, but just make sure that you've caught each of those leaves down into place with your double crochet at the top. Just make sure when you're looking for that chain at the top there that you haven't found the top of the first stitch and that you've definitely used the skipped chain at the top of the little leaf. So from here on, this motif echoes the Forget-Me-Not motif. You're going to make it square in almost exactly the same way as you did the Forget-Me-Not. So there's little point me showing you every single stage of this motif, but you can look at the step-by-step images in the pattern and refer to the Forget-Me-Not video if you need any further help. So at the end of the motif you should see that it mimics your Forget-Me-Not motif. Just make sure that everything's lining up, in that your blue petals or leaves that you made earlier on all line up with corners. That should be the one double crochet in there and not the group of 3. So just check you've got everything lined up, and you're going to make 4 of these. The one thing you need to do at the end is just put some stitch markers in place, and you're going to put those into the central stitch of the 3 at the corner so that you can then start to join together, and I'm going to do that for you in just a second. So just pop your stitch marker into your central one of the 3 stitches at each corner, and do the same, or if you haven't done it already, just do the same on your Forget-Me-Not motif so that you've marked the corners ready for putting together. So I always think the more making up and putting together you can do as you go along, the better, so you've not got a big job at the end. You can see that I've sewn my ends in. I always do that as I go along as well. And what I'm going to do now is just show you how to join these 2 motifs together. You're going to join a Forget-Me-Not either side of your central Columbine motif, so you get strips of 3 pieces. So you should have 4 lots of 3 joined together by the end of this set of patterns. So I'm just going to show you this one join along the top here to join the 2 together. I'm going to turn the Forget-Me-Not motif back to front, so I've got the back facing me, and I'm going to line up those 2 corners. I'm going to take that stitch marker out of that one now and put my hook through that central one. I always just double check, go back to the front and just check that that is the central one, and then I'm going to put my hook into that marked stitch there and remove that marker too. So I'm in the 2 corner stitches with my hook. I'm using the 4mm hook. I'm using recipe 1, so if you're doing recipe 2 you will be on the 3.5mm hook, and I'm going to use Fern just so you can see the stitches, but you should be using parchment, or if you're in recipe 2 you'll be using Night. So I'm going to join my yarn just by doing 1 chain, and then I'm going to do 1 double crochet into those same pair of stitches. So I'm just going through the whole chain. I'm not taking parts, I'm not taking the back of the chain, I'm taking the whole part of both stitches and draw that yarn through. So that's 1 double crochet into both of those stitches, and if I want to I can just pull that tail out there. Okay, and then I'm going to find stitch for stitch all the way along. So I'm going to find, because you're working at the back it's not always easy, but you want to find the whole of that stitch and the whole of the next stitch like that, and do 1 double crochet into there, 1 double into the next pair, And you're going to do that the whole way along. So I find I pinch my work as I go along, so I can kind of see those chain as I'm looking down onto the top of there. And I'm just going to do that the whole way along until I've joined all my stitches. So I'm at the end of that. I've joined all the way along from the first marked stitch all the way through to the last marked stitch, and I've just fastened off my yarn at the end there. I did one chain and pulled the tail through to fasten off. So when I look at that, I can see that I've got a double crochet into every set of stitches the whole way along that edge. As I said before, I've worked in the green colour so that you can see my stitches. You'll be working in the colour that you've actually crocheted in so it doesn't show. So that's the wrong side of the work, and it does just leave a little ridge on the wrong side there. I can live with that, I quite like it, it doesn't bother me. And then on the right side of the work you should see like a little tram line or train line in between your stitches, so that you've got the little stitch in between each piece the whole way along. And yours won't show quite like mine, yours will be in the same colour. So you're going to join those two together, and then you're going to join another forget-me-not motif this side. Just be careful when you're joining. I've just seen on this piece as I've moved this one that is going to be the side where I've got my slip stitch from the row before, from the last row of the motif. So just make sure, sometimes I put a stitch marker in there just so that when I'm joining I can get a really nice neat join and not think there's two stitches there when there's actually one. So that's it for that. I'm just going to show you the first part of the Acanthus motif now. Because the Acanthus motif is quite complicated, to say the least actually, it's easier if you work it in stages. When we were first doing the patterns, we thought we'd make the Acanthus motif as a whole part in the final piece of the pattern, but actually the prospect of making 8 of these rectangular motifs I thought would push you all over the edge. So what we've done instead is we've broken the design down into, I think, 6 stages. I think it's 6. You're going to do a little bit of the Acanthus motif in different patterns, and in this part, in part 2, you're simply going to make the little flower that you can see in my hands here as the central part of the motif. So there's just a couple of rounds here to do. It includes picot stitches, so I'm going to show you how to make a really nice neat picot. If you're working in the Life and Batik version, then the actual flower part of this is made using parchment. If you're going to do the bamboo and cotton version, then that is pumice. So I'm going to talk you through the Acanthus motif now. We're just going to do 3 rounds of that this time. You're going to make the central ring and fill it up with 8 double crochet. That's 8 single crochet if you're doing US terms. And then you're going to do the next round and just one more round after that, and then that's all you're going to do this time round. You need to make 8 of them, so my suggestion is that you make them in a production line fashion, in that you make all 8 of the rings and then make all 8 of the next round, all 8 of the following round. Working in a production line fashion just makes it, I think, makes it easier to deal with doing lots of repeats. It also means that the pattern kind of sticks in your head and you can remember what you're doing, rather than making one full piece and going back and having to start all over again. So I've worked this in the Blue Haze shade in the Life DK. If you're doing the bamboo and cotton version, you will have used Night, which is also the dark blue. I've finished over here, so I'm going to join my new yarn in over opposite here, and I'm going to use Caramel. If you're doing the bamboo cotton version, then you're going to use Celery, which is light green. I'm just going to use my hook there just to find that first stitch, my choice of stitch, draw my yarn through, do 1 chain, and then I'm going to do 2 double crochets into that same stitch. That's 1 and 2, and I'm just going to pull that tail out because it's wanting to jump out of the stitch. Okay, so now the next instruction is to do a spike DC or a spike SC if you're doing US terms, and a spike is represented with SP in capital letters. So what I'm going to do the spike DC is I'm going to put my hook down into the center of that ring, so down into there, and what will happen is when I do the spike double crochet, it will cover up the next stitch, and I want it to do that, so you're not going to look for that, that will get covered up. So I'm going to put my hook down into the center of the ring, draw the yarn through, and just complete that double crochet, and it's covered up that stitch. I'm going to do 2 double crochet into the next stitch and another spike DC into the next stitch, and that covers up that next one. 2 into the next stitch, 1, 2, a spike DC. Now in this case it's going to cover up my slip stitch, so just make sure that you get that right when you cover up your slip stitch if you're in the same position as me. 2 double crochet into the next one, and then I'm going to finish just with a spike DC into the centre of the ring. It looks a little bit square at this point, so don't worry if it does look a little bit square. And then I'm going to do my slip stitch to join. Use my hook to find the slip stitch, and that is the end of my second round. It's actually round 1 in the pattern. So I'm going to fasten off, just cut my yarn. There's no need really at this point to sew your ends in, just cut your yarn, draw that through the stitch, and use your hook just to take that tail through to the back of the work. Okay, and there's your little central part of that motif. I don't know, I probably wouldn't sew my ends in at this point. I'll probably just leave them there until I've got this next round on, which I'm going to do using parchment. So I'm going to join the parchment in now, but I'm going to join it into just the front part of any stitch. So that is called the front loop of a stitch. When we look at the chain that runs along the top of our work, there will always be 2 sides to that chain if there's a chain at the top, and you've got part of it there, that's the back loop, and part of it here at the front, and that is the front loop. And all the way round we're going to use these front loops, and the reason I'm doing that is because the back loops are then used later on. You can choose any stitch, so just choose whichever one you want to start in. I'm just going to go in there, catch my yarn through and do 1 chain, and that is the first of the 3 chain needed to do this round. So I'm just going to join that, done my 1 chain, 2 more, that's my first, the equivalent of my first stitch. So working into the front loop of all the stitches, I'm going to do 1 treble into the same stitch, and now I'm going to make a picot, and I do that by doing 3 chain, 1, 2, 3, and then you're going to do a slip stitch into the base of that 3 chain to make a nice little kind of knobble. Some people go into the 3rd chain, some instructions say that, but what I actually do is go into the top of the stitch that was made before those 3 chain, and I take both parts of that. If you can see here, if I try and come up really close, I'm going to take that part and that part of that treble that was made under those 3 chains. So if I pull that out, there's the 3 chain, I'm looking there at the top there, and I'm going to take that part and that part of the top of the treble. I'm going to do a slip stitch into there, pull that through the chain, and I've made this little picot, little knobble. So then I'm going to go into the front of the next stitch and do 2 trebles, 1 and 2, okay, and then I'm going to make another little picot, so I do 3 chain, 1, 2, 3, and I find the top of that stitch, which is there, and the first part of that treble, which is there, and do my slip stitch into there, and that gives you really nice neat picots. And you're going to do that the whole way round so that you end up with a picot on the second stitch of every group of 2 trebles. That's US doubles. I can see on my next stitch I'm just about to meet my slip stitch from the previous round, so in case you find that a struggle too, I always find it a little bit of a chore when I get to the slip stitch. I'm actually going to use the slip stitch itself, so I'm just going to take the front of that slip stitch, which is really tight there actually, but just use the front of that slip stitch and do 1, whoops, and 2. Then I'm going to do the picot, 1, 2, 3, find front part of the chain, that side of this treble, and just do my slip stitch. And then I'm going to miss that next one because that I actually chose to use the slip stitch and not the stitch, and then jump along to the next one there, and that will keep my stitch count correct. So although that looks like a bit of a gap in there at the moment, once you've sewn your ends in and given that a good old pull, that will all come together nicely. Okay, so you're going to do that the whole way round. So you've got 2 trebles into every stitch, and the second one of each of those will have a picot at the top of it. Here I am at the end of round 2. I've got 2 stitches into every stitch, and on the second one of each of those 2 I've got a little picot. So when you have a count round, you should have 24 stitches and 12 picots around the outside edge, and you need to make 8 of these. When you look at the back of the motif, I haven't sewn my ends in, but I would do that next, is you should be able to see that you've got the remaining part of those stitches all left at the back there. Can you, if I bring that up there, can you see you've got part of every stitch left behind at the back, and those will be used when you work your next rounds in the next step of the patterns. That's it actually, we're there now. So you need to make 8 of these, you need to make 4 of the Columbine motifs, and I'll see you back here in a couple of weeks time. In the meantime, stay safe and keep well and enjoy your crochet. I'll see you soon.